Today's story revolves around a troublesome sister-in-law who backed down due to the strong response from the mother of the protagonist. What exactly happened? Let's take a look together. Please subscribe and like our channel.
Hello. My husband and I dated for about a year before we got married. We initially started with a casual relationship, which eventually led us to consider marriage. We didn't face any significant issues during our wedding preparations. Although there were minor disagreements with my mother-in-law, my husband always stood by me. My mother-in-law never mistreated me despite our differences. My sister-in-law seemed to dislike me a bit, but I thought everything would be fine since my in-laws treated me well. My parents are quite different. My father is caring, while my mother is a bit strict. Both my in-laws seemed kind-hearted before our marriage. However, my sister-in-law was a bit of a concern. She had a somewhat challenging attitude towards me. When I expressed my concerns to my husband, he assured me not to worry as he would mediate effectively. His supportive words comforted me. After our marriage, we frequently visited both sets of parents, especially on weekends. Usually, my sister-in-law would also be there. She seemed to think of herself as the best person in the world. She complained that her in-laws were too inferior for her to get along with. From my perspective, the issues seemed to stem from her rudeness. I assume others would also have the same perception. My mother-in-law was constantly nagged by her. When my in-laws visited our house, my sister-in-law would open our fridge and complain, "Organize these food containers. If this food is old, why is it still in the fridge?" My mother-in-law never tried to stop her. My husband did confront her about this behavior, but she defended herself, saying she was just giving advice as a more experienced homekeeper. Our house is located close to both our parents. My parents only visit when there's an occasion and always call beforehand. However, my in-laws would drop by anytime, even on weekdays, without prior notice, causing me stress. It's a bit burdensome when in-laws visit. My sister-in-law often accompanied them and nagged about the state of our house, especially the fridge. Sometimes, they would already be there by the time I came home from work, which was even more exhausting. Listening to my sister-in-law's nagging was stressful, and her know-it-all attitude was irritating. She would even deliver lengthy speeches about important life matters. She claimed that she had a tough life, taking care of her younger sibling and managing the house since her parents were working. Her husband is a gentle person, and I wondered how he can put up with her domineering attitude. I heard he's the eldest son. My sister-in-law cut off most of her contact with her in-laws. She claimed that her in-laws treated her poorly, and she decided not to see them anymore. But I found it hard to believe. I couldn't help but question. Did she really get bullied by her in-laws with that attitude? It was stressful when my in-laws visited during weekdays, but weekends were even more so. After a busy weekday, I found it hard to clean the house daily. So my husband and I preferred to do a thorough cleaning over the weekend. But when my in-laws visited, it felt burdensome. If the house wasn't cleaned properly, the visit felt even more burdensome. When my in-laws visited without my sister-in-law, it was slightly better. But when she was there, even my mother-in-law would join in her nagging. It was extremely tiring to endure not only their interference with housekeeping, but also their constant questioning about when we would have a baby. Additionally, I had to listen to my sister-in-law's self-praise. Her tales of sacrifice for her family sounded like they were from a much older person, not someone in her mid-30s. It was unbelievable and ridiculous, especially as she didn't seem like someone who would have struggled or even lived with her in-laws. Every time she nagged at me, I tried my best to hide my annoyance, but I'm sure it showed in my expression. When I told my husband about the stress caused by his family, his initial reaction was defensive, saying they were just trying to get close to me. Not knowing how to respond, I just endured it, which only led to more stress, and eventually a big fight with my husband. It was only then that he started to understand my feelings. My sister-in-law not only nagged a lot, but also insisted that I should be respectful to the elders. She said I should always greet my in-laws with a smile. It was ironic that she said this while barely having any contact with her own in-laws. Anyone listening to her might think she was a dutiful daughter-in-law. About 6 months into our marriage, my husband began to take my side more. However, that led my mother-in-law to side with my sister-in-law. If they considered me as family, why did they take sides? A month ago, on a Saturday, there was a memorial service for my grandmother, which also happened to be my father's birthday. Since my father's birthday is based on the lunar calendar, it coincides with my grandmother's Memorial Day each year. However, if my father's birthday falls on a weekday, we usually celebrate it over the weekend, so it doesn't usually clash with the memorial service. After discussing with my husband, we decided to leave my in-laws' house around 3 p.m. and head to my parents' house. My younger sister, who got married before me, said her family would also arrive at our parents' house around that time, even though she lives far away and could only make it by then. I wished I could go to my parents' house in the morning. After discussing this with my husband, he informed his mother, who agreed to our plan. When I was about to leave for my parents' house, around 3 p.m. after preparing most of the food for the memorial service, my sister-in-law, who had been cooped up in a room playing with her kids, asked where I was going. Her tone was irritated, implying she already knew the answer. I told her about our plans, and that we had already informed my mother-in-law. Her response, implying that a married woman's first loyalty should be to her in-laws, was aggravating. She then suggested that we could have celebrated my father's birthday earlier. I explained that because his birthday fell on a Saturday this year, we hadn't considered moving it. She then accused me of being thoughtless and disregarding my in-laws. My husband defended me, saying it didn't make sense to move a Saturday birthday celebration, and that it was absurd to interpret our decision as disregarding his family. When he mentioned that we had already discussed this with his mother, my sister-in-law suddenly yelled at her, blaming her for my arrogant behavior. My mother-in-law then changed her stance and told me to leave. After the memorial service, I told her that wasn't possible. I felt it wasn't worth responding to, so I told my husband that I would leave first, and he should come over after the memorial service. As I was about to leave, my sister-in-law said, "If you leave now, you can't come back." I couldn't help but laugh. She asked if I found her words amusing, and I agreed. I then told her she was the one who had cut off contact with her in-laws, and asked who she thought she was to lecture others about treating in-laws well. I said, "You've severed ties with your in-laws because you took their kindness for granted and acted selfishly, right? It's obvious. I'll leave now. Since you told me not to come back, I won't." I also told my mother-in-law that, since my sister-in-law told me not to come back, I wouldn't. I said, from a mother's perspective, one's own daughter is more important than a daughter-in-law, and left for my parents' house. When my husband arrived at my parents' house earlier than expected, I asked what had happened. He said he had been arguing with his mother and sister before the memorial service. After I left, it seems that my sister-in-law and mother-in-law vented their anger on my husband, who stood his ground. He argued with them, asking if they really believed a daughter-in-law should prioritize her in-law's memorial service over her own father's birthday in this day and age, and why they were insisting on such a thing. When my sister-in-law started shouting at my husband, my father-in-law intervened and told my husband to leave. My sister-in-law even said, "How did I raise you?" To which my husband responded, "You raised me. I had to give in to you a lot because you were so greedy when we were growing up. Don't talk nonsense." And he left. Not long after my husband arrived, his phone rang. It was my sister-in-law. He went outside to take the call, and when he came back, he said that she was threatening to come over right away. She said she needed to confront my parents about how they raised their daughter. We were worried, knowing her personality, she might actually show up. My husband seemed a bit anxious too. Seeing our expressions, my mom asked what was going on. So I explained the situation. After hearing the story, my mom told my husband, "Tell your sister to come over right now if she dares. Tell her to be prepared to have a bucket of water dumped on her head." My husband immediately called my sister-in-law and relayed my mom's message. After hearing what my husband had to say, my sister-in-law stuttered and hung up the phone. Since that day, I haven't been to my in-laws' house and haven't been in contact. My husband seemed a bit worn out, dealing with his mother and sister over the phone for a few days. Eventually, he stopped answering their calls as well. It seems likely that my mother-in-law will continue to side with my sister-in-law. And with someone on her side, my sister-in-law will probably keep tormenting me. While my husband is on my side, he isn't able to communicate effectively with my sister-in-law. It seems the best solution might be to just avoid visiting my in-laws. But I'm curious what you all think from a third-party perspective.
It seems that the sister-in-law is a person who tends to dominate everyone around her. With someone even taking her side, who can possibly curb her behavior? It seems like the best solution might be to avoid her altogether. What do you all think?